Folks will continue to be able to log on throughout, so we'll hopefully be welcoming more folks as we go. So we begin today by acknowledging that here in Salt Lake City, we are located on land which is named for the Ute tribe and is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. We recognize and respect the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. Additionally, we are utilizing the technology of Zoom, which is headquartered in San Jose, California, on the traditional lands of the Ohlone peoples. We pay our respects to the current and past elders of all of these lands for their continued stewardship. We also must acknowledge that the prosperity of what we call the United States has depended on the labor of enslaved peoples. Rather than simply speak these words, we encourage all of us to consider donating to organizations like the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, Campaign Zero, and the NAACP. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brooke Horsch, and I'm the Executive Director of Utah Presents. I am a white woman with shoulder-length gray, lots of gray hair. I'm wearing a green sweater and a gold necklace, and I'm in my home office where I have some art on the wall behind me, as well as a cool little wooden piece of art that is a representation of the delicate art, which is one of our most famous landscape items here in Utah. So Utah Presents is a multidisciplinary presenter at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and we're thrilled to be convening today our fourth session in the Artist Elevated, Discussing Equity and Creativity in the Mountain West series. Artist Elevated was inspired by the brilliant and collaborative work of Creating New Futures, a national conversation led by dance artists of color from across the country. As we witnessed those conversations, we realized that we needed to both expand the conversation to address other disciplines and also contract the conversation to be specific to our region, the Mountain West. You can find future session information on the Utah Presents website, as well as the recordings of our previous sessions. And we'd love for you all to help us spread the word to as many folks as possible about the future sessions and viewing the prior recorded sessions. I'd like to give some thanks to our key partners that have helped us make this program happen: the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, the College of Fine Arts at the University of Utah, the Salt Lake City Arts Council, and Utah Humanities. All of those organizations were really instrumental by helping us value the artists involved in the program and being able to pay them for their participation, time, and labor in this series. Okay, now for just a few Zoom logistics. In today's session, we're going to start after I'm finished with some introductions, and then there'll be a conversation led by our moderator. And for the last part of the session, we will share any questions you have with our moderator and panelists. If you do have questions come up, you can post them at any time. You don't have to wait for the tail end when we're going to be answering questions. And we'd like you to post them in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar. It's a little different than the chat area. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see it on the right-hand side of that lower section of your Zoom window. If your question is for a specific panelist, please indicate who it's for when you ask it so that we know to direct it to that person. I also ask you to join us in positive affirmations. So one of the hardest shifts for us to the virtual space is the lack of auditory affirmation from an audience. So let's show our support for this particular cohort of amazing artists by holding them up via the chat feature. So you can say, oh my gosh, that was an amazing insight, or you can insert an emoji, just anything that you're having a reaction to. And normally we'd be able to hear that gasp or hear your applause. You can put it in the chat. Finally, I want to let everyone know that this is being recorded. So you can check back at the website later to find that link. So now I'm so pleased to introduce our moderator for today's session, Sarah Sinwell. In addition to being super smart and super kind, Sarah is an assistant professor in the Department of Film and Media Arts at the University of Utah. She has written and published about topics such as YouTube, web series, art house cinemas, and queer and female independent filmmaking. Her book Indie Cinema Online was recently published, so go check it out. And Sarah, I'm so glad you're here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to hear this conversation today. I'm Sarah Sinwell, and I'm in my living room right now. You can't really see my Polish poster art behind me, but there is movie Polish poster art behind me. I'm a blonde white woman. I'm wearing a black top, if you know me, that's usually what I'm wearing. So I'm really excited to hear what everyone's going to have to say today. I encourage you to put questions in the Q&A and your comments in the chat. So what we're going to start with today is I'm going to ask each filmmaker to talk about themselves, explain who you are, what you're working on right now, and what your work is about. And because of the way in which the Zoom works, I'm just going to do that in order of how I see you in the frame of the Zoom imagery today. So Amy, would you start off for us, please?
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Marquis, and I just need to put out a little full disclosure here. I am dealing with a mild case of COVID, and the brain fog is really real. So I'm doing something today that I've never done on a panel before, which is refer to my notes, because if I don't do that, then I'm pretty sure there are going to be sentences where I just forget mid-sentence what I'm trying to say. So thank you for being patient with me on that front. I hope all of you are healthy right now. So I'm an indie filmmaker, director, editor, shooter based in Boulder, Colorado. I'm also a mom of a beautiful 8-year-old daughter named Era. Physical description. I'm a middle-aged, brown-headed, mixed-race woman. I'm wearing my favorite sweater and sitting in my home office with protest art behind me by Shepard Fairey, which I'm really psyched to have up on my walls because it feels like a powerful space. So I was born in Indonesia in the 70s and adopted by white middle-class American parents. My dad was an academic and he was working in Jakarta at the time. We returned to Southeast Asia many times throughout my life where we were just visiting or we lived there. I was basically raised though in white suburbia, and it probably wasn't until this year that I really started coming to terms with my racial identity and how powerfully it has shaped and continues to shape my work. My career started in 2000 as a magazine editor. And I think it was around 2008 that I started getting drawn to the short doc style videos that were just flooding the internet at the time. I was getting a little bored with print, so I was pushing the magazine staff in this direction and directing some small projects for my desk. And then in 2011, I finally got on set and made my 2 first short films in Yosemite. And in 2013, I left the desk job and did it full time. I started my filmmaking career with a series of national park stories about non-white people, an attempt to better represent more Americans in those spaces. Today, I'm working on an anti-racism magical realism documentary with my 8-year-old daughter that holds up a mirror to white suburbia. I'm also editing, shooting, and field directing a feature documentary about a white climber from Boulder who in 2016 invited a young Black man from the Bronx on a 7-week road trip and climbing adventure across the West in hopes to save him. So as you can imagine, that story took a 180, and it turns out that the young man from the Bronx is the teacher who's helping the climber really come to terms with his white fragility. I've also been shooting and directing for nonprofits and commercial clients, and most recently helped cast and direct part of the Biden-Harris campaign's victory video.
Thank you so much, Amy. Okay, how about Holly? You're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Tuckett. I'm a white, middle-class, middle-aged queer person who is wearing a plaid shirt. I have very distinctive hairstyle. It's a faux hawk, gray faux hawk. I'm sitting in my office in Salt Lake City, Utah. There are 2 guitars hanging from my wall. That does not necessarily mean that I am any good at playing them. They're on the wall behind me. I have been a documentary filmmaker since probably just a little before 2013. I did short form documentary before I made my first feature film, Church and State, which came out in 2018. It was about the marriage equality case here in Utah. And it's out on all of the streamable platforms. You can find it for rent or sale on iTunes, Amazon, all the things. Currently, I am working on a documentary called Anchor Point. It's about two female wildland firefighters who are going through their 2019 season. And we spend time with them in Florida at a training for women firefighters, where we explore the struggles that they go through in being women in a very male dominated profession. They leave that training and go into their season, and we follow both of those firefighters through their season in 2019. So you get a sense for what it is like to be a woman in wildland fire. Yeah, you can find that on the interwebs at Anchor Point Documentary or anchorpointfilm.com.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Holly. I encourage all of you to promote your work in the chat. If you want to send us any of the links to your works, I'm sure all of us would like to see those. So Ramona, you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ramona Emerson. I am a Navajo filmmaker from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm a Navajo woman. I've got long black hair with little pieces of gray that you can't see because Zoom has got bad resolution. Yay. And I'm wearing glasses. I'm sitting in my office. This is where I edit and I work out of my home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been making films pretty much for about 25 years. And I started out doing short narrative films and then moved into documentary films. And I have a production company that I run with my husband here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, called Real Indian Pictures. And it's REEL Indian. You can look us up online at realindianpictures.com and see some of the work that we do. Right now, I am currently working on a docu-series called Crossing the Line that addresses the issues with border town violence and Navajo and Indigenous peoples within 4 towns in Arizona and New Mexico. In the past year, I also have been working extensively on another documentary about the history of Fort Wingate here in New Mexico, as well as working with a whole team of women of color on a documentary called And She Could Be Next, which followed several women who were running for office during the 2016 campaign. Unfortunately, our section was not included in the 2 sections that ended up being put out on PBS, but they actually made a shorter documentary that follows Deb Haaland, who myself and my husband were tasked to follow Deb Haaland during the 2016 campaign. And you can find that short documentary on Pop Sugar. It just premiered earlier this month. And please catch And She Could Be Next. It's also playing on PBS right now. And we also just released The Mayors of Shiprock, another documentary which followed a group of young Navajo leaders in their community over 5 years. That is going to be on World Channel until the end of the month. And then you'll have to catch it on Amazon or through pbs.com or Vision Maker. So thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the panel.
Thank you so much, Ramona. I'm really excited. I hope we have time to talk about how you get your work distributed at such places as PBS and Amazon and Pop Sugar. I'm hoping that we might have time for that conversation a little bit later on today after we talk about what it's like to be an artist at this moment in the Intermountain West. So Angela, you are next.
Hello, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Angela Rosales Chalice. You can call me Angela or Angela. I am originally from Cochabamba, Bolivia. My physical description is that I am short and I have black hair, straight black long hair. My complexion is brownish yellowish. I'm wearing lipstick and there's like a little bit reddish. I have my Bolivian earrings that have the aguayo. And the space that I am in is a dance studio that my husband and I own. In the background has dancers, children's dancing, and it's in black and white. And this is a beautiful sacred space for us. And about myself, like I said, I am from Bolivia and came to the United States 20 years ago to study dance. And I went to BYU and I was teaching dance in the elementary schools. And one day I said, I'm gonna take a film class. And in between teaching, I went to the community college, took a film class and got hooked. I did my program there for 2 years. And after that, I got my master's at BYU in film and emphasis in animation and screen dance. And the type of work that I do is dance films. And that is my thing. It's you create artwork doesn't belong in the stage, it belongs in the camera. And the project that we just finished is called Samskara, Strength in Our Shared Experiences. And it's a project that showcases 9 dancers from 9 different cultures. So we have India, Brazil, Bolivia, B-boy dancer, clogger, Pacific Islands, 9 different, Japan, Tanzania. And it is also shot in Utah in 9 different locations in Utah. And it is to showcase that Utah, it is a diverse place with locations and with people. And the current project that we're working on, I work at BYU in the dance department. I'm a visiting professor there. And I direct a dance company that goes to the elementary schools, and it's an outreach company. So we're preparing 5 films that would be talking about cultural responsibility education. And yeah, we're working on that and we'll see how that goes. Is that everything I need to say? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm also hoping that we can have a conversation about shared experience as part of this conversation, as well as how we can bring these sort of ideas into our classrooms and to these alternative distribution spaces so that people can actually access all of the work that all of you amazing filmmakers are working on right now and that we'll continue to work on. So Cohardo, you're our next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cohardo Lindsey. I also go by Cajardo. I am currently in my den in Aurora, Colorado. It is green. I have a Hemingway portrait over there to my left. I have a mirror behind me that says, "Change your thoughts and change your world," which I subscribe to. I am a middle-aged African-American man. I would say I'm caramel in complexion. Bald head, black and white, scruffy little beard at the moment, little pudgy in the midsection. I'm currently wearing a black hoodie and a green shirt underneath. I am a filmmaker, a screenwriter, an actor, a poet, a performance poet, and also an attorney. Which one of these is not like the others? I became an attorney after experiences that I had had with law enforcement that forced me to find avenues to find out what my rights were. I had no intentions of practicing. However, after getting the degree several years later, I decided why not? And so I am currently a practicing attorney. I've worked in Denver DA's office prosecuting murder, rape, and I'm also doing civil work as well. I am originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a former athlete. As far as my artistic endeavors, I am a newer filmmaker. I have 2 short films under my belt currently. One is called The Minstrel and the Bard. The other is called The Dance. Both of them have premiered at the Color of Conversations Film Festival. The first one summer of 2019, and just recently we had another one premiere in October of 2020. I am working currently, me as well as a team of people. It's just not me. We all know that filmmaking is highly collaborative, but as a filmmaker, I am working on my first feature film. We're currently in development. It's called Blackface, The Story of Nobody. It's about a Black man in 1918 who grows weary of performing in blackface and gets the uncanny opportunity to perform William Shakespeare's Hamlet on Broadway, but first he must uncover his true worth. You can find more information about that project at blackfacemovie.com. And along those same lines, our social media for the project is on Twitter, Instagram, at blackfacemovie. And if you want to find out anything about me personally, that is at Cohardo. My work primarily centers around expanding consciousness. So anything that I'm doing is in that regard. Typically, my characters are going through some sort of awakening, spiritual awakening, race awakening, whatever that may be. But I'm really into just having one perception, going through a cocoon stage and coming out a butterfly and seeing things from a 1,000-foot perspective as far instead of being just here on the ground. And so when you read my work, whether I am writing dramas, horror, a horror screenplay, a thriller, or dramedy, you're probably going to find characters who are going through some type of metamorphosis. So that's what I'm about.
Thanks so much, Cohardo. I looked at the trailer for your upcoming film. Everyone should watch it. And I think it's all a reminder for all of us that if you're starting to be working in the filmmaking industry right now, if you can post as much information as you can on your website about even just a trailer or a teaser or what's coming, I think that all of these websites of everyone's here, check those out if you're wondering how to do that, because I think they all serve as good models. So first question after your introductions, instead of going in order, maybe you all could answer, raise your hand on the screen if you want to answer this question. I'm hoping all of you would be interested. So the first question, and this is part of our Artists Elevated series, as filmmakers and artists working in the Intermountain West, how does the location of this place that we live in, how does it influence your work as an artist? What do you think the Intermountain West brings to the table? And what do you wish people would know about the Intermountain West, since often the filmmaking community is associated with LA and New York? What do you think working and living and creating art in the Intermountain West, how do you think that influences your work as an artist? And if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, I'm happy to call upon you. Holly.
I think for me, I lived in LA for a while, and so I wasn't in the film industry, but I definitely know the hustle and bustle of being in LA. I think for me, doing work here in the Intermountain West, and what a lot of people don't realize is that we have a very robust film industry here. Surprisingly, there are a large group of documentary filmmakers who reside here and do work here, or use this as their home base. So I think, as far as like networking and things like that, it's really quite easy to find like minds, people who are doing the same kind of work that you do, and even like getting to know Cohardo's work and Ramona's work and Amy's work outside of just Salt Lake City proper, where I am based. I can reach out to those other networks within the Intermountain West and do interesting work. And I don't know, I think the landscape here too lends a lot to just artistry in and of itself.
Cohardo, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I did. So I didn't talk a whole lot about me being an actor, but I have been an actor for several years here in the Denver metro area. I have representation in other cities across the country. And I will say that being here in the Denver metro area, I am union as well. I find myself really focused on putting not that you wouldn't, but I mean, it's really neurotic to me to put my best foot forward, because there aren't, for me, many opportunities to act specifically in union films, and I only do union work. I would consider the Denver metro area a non-union town. Most of the work that you will do here is documentaries, also industrial film and commercial is what I would, and Amy may think something different based on her experience, but that's been my experience from being here. And so I find myself that when those opportunities come to put my best foot forward, also I find how this area has influenced me. I believe it's influenced me creatively. It's one of those towns where I too have lived in New York City. I've lived in Los Angeles, and this is just, if there was like a, what is it, the Three Little Bears or whatever it is, this one is just right. Well, this town for me is just right. I feel there's a lot of space for me to create that when I was in New York for a short period of time, and even LA, it was just going so fast, and I felt like I just couldn't really get my bearings. And it was when I got to Colorado, I found my creative spirit and my chutzpah, so to speak. I also look at Colorado, there's this cliche, but it works for me, that necessity is the mother of invention. And when you don't have a lot to go with regard to, at least for me, my experience, information of, you want to be a filmmaker, how do you get this going? You find ways to integrate yourself into the community. And I found wonderful people so far on my journey who are extremely collaborative, amazingly talented, and willing to go forward and to do projects, which originally I didn't think it was going to be that way, but I was pleasantly surprised, and I'm so excited with who I've met so far in the film community here in Denver, Colorado, and who I've been able to work with. And I'm very, very excited to work with others and to find out what others do, specifically like Amy and people on this panel as well, and Holly and Ramona.
Amy and then Ramona. I also think I'd love to hear more when you all have time during this small, very limited time we have here, more about how you go about meeting all those people in your community, if you have ideas about how to do that, especially for the new filmmakers that might be watching today. How do you connect with those communities? And I think during COVID-19, it's an even harder task. So I'm curious if you all have ideas about that. But Amy and then Ramona.
I've made a lot of films with nature as a backdrop. Sometimes it's a healing space. Sometimes it reveals something about a story or character that might not have come out otherwise. As a result, a lot of my work gets lumped into the adventure film genre, which is kind of funny because that's not really what I'm going for, but it's, and I'm not sure that would happen if I didn't live where I live. There awesome things about that. There are things a little that frustrate me. I think what's great is I've been able to develop relationships with brands that rely on video and even documentary storytelling, shorts and features, to help strengthen their brand. So that's been an interesting space to push into, both on the business model side, but also in just getting small stories in front of bigger audiences, which is great. It's also an industry and a space that can really lack in diversity and inclusion. So, I can go into that later, but I think a lot of people talk the talk and want to be better on that front, but there's a lot of room for progress and improvement there. Sorry, I'm forgetting where I was going with this, but let me just say that the question you just asked, Sarah, there's an incredible group, nonprofit that supports female filmmakers called the Luca Media Collective that I want to shout out. And for a while, we were focusing on the Four Corners region. When the capacity came down a little bit, we decided just to focus on Colorado. They are the fiscal sponsors for all my independent film projects, which is great because then I can have bigger donors coming in and getting some benefit from that. thanks for posting that link. And I also am the moderator of the Colorado Filmmakers page, and there are other pages like that locally. There's Find for Denver. There's like a page for editors. So Facebook, as much as I want to break up with Facebook, it remains a pretty good place for community. I'd also say, and Angela and Ramona, I'm curious if you are part of the Brown Girls Doc Mafia. That has been a huge resource for me, and that's international. There aren't a ton of us, I don't think, in the Intermountain West region, but I'm starting to kind of find like the sisters out here, and it's like, oh my gosh, that group has blown things open for me. So if you aren't based in Colorado, I will still let you into the Colorado Filmmakers group if you have a project here, or you're thinking about moving here, or you're actively working with filmmakers in the state.
Thanks so much, Amy. I also, as you are mentioning other resources, I study independent and female filmmaking, and I'm really interested, like I mentioned before, in how people get distribution and get their films made, especially within those communities. So I also wanted to recommend Chicken and Egg Pictures and Seed and Spark, both of which are really great resources. A lot of you are nodding. I don't know if you've even been funded by them, but they're really great resources, especially if you're women working in the industry or working on documentary filmmaking. So Ramona, and then Angela.
Yes, I think all of my films have been here in New Mexico, and New Mexico actually has a fairly decent burgeoning film industry because of our huge incentives. So there has been a lot of large productions that come into our state and hire and train people. We do have some, diversity issues, which we are trying to get a hold of. But when I started to be a filmmaker, I knew that almost every film I was going to make was going to be about the Navajo Nation, and it was going to be about where I live. So every film I've made has been here in this state. I also, under that same caveat, understand that because I'm making small films about New Mexico and about Navajos in particular, that are very hard to distribute. Doing personal films and doing films that are about a very specific community have been super hard to distribute. I've done most of my distribution by myself until very recently because of that. But here in New Mexico, we have a lot of, I think I've been in this industry for 25 years, and that's how I have made contacts with people, because you have to go to the film meetings, you have to go to the soirees that the film festivals have. And as much as I do not like to schmooze and hang out and eat cheese and crackers, it's part of the process of meeting people and getting your name out there, talking about your work, and making those connections yourself. I think that's a really important part. And it's something that early in my years struggled with. I was always pretty shy about talking to people. But after like about 10 years of just being super shy and not getting anywhere, I just had to snap out of it. And because you have to ask for money constantly as a filmmaker. And so you have to pitch, you have to be comfortable talking to people about your project and about yourself and self-promotion. And for me, as a Navajo person, that has been the hardest thing, because we're taught all of our lives that it's rude to be self-promoting and talk about yourself all the time. And then but you got to eat. So you got to, pick your battles, and you got to do the self-promotion. And Brown Girls Doc Mafia is big for me. I have a lot of friends who are Brown Girls Doc Mafia. Unfortunately, like you say, there's not a lot of us here in this region that are part of that. But the great part of it, I've gotten a lot of jobs because people say, oh, we want to film on the Navajo Nation. We need a shooter, an editor, and a producer to go out there and just do it in a one-man kind of thing. And so they'll call me. And so because of that, Brown Girls Doc Mafia has brought me a lot of business and introduced me to a lot of people I would have not met otherwise.
Thanks so much, Ramona. I also wanted to shout out to some of our other local organizations in Utah. I'm sure there's equivalents in New Mexico and Colorado. For example, the Utah Film Commission. I know, Angela, you've received a grant from them. So follow all these people on your social media, go to their events. They're still doing a lot of these events on Zoom now. So I would recommend thinking about the Utah Film Commission, the Utah Film Center, and the Salt Lake Film Society. I'm a member of that board, so feel free to contact them through me if you choose to do that. But certainly the significance of talking about all of these different organizations that you can join that will really connect with the community. Holly's telling me the Utah Film Center is her fiscal sponsor, so that's so great to know. So again, thinking about how these local nonprofits, and there's a lot of conversations that we're having in the nonprofit community right now about how we can make that ask for money in an environment in which we're all in economic decline right now. And I think the ask is a huge part of that, and still making those connections is a huge part of that. So Angela, what did you want to talk about here?
So I want to say that Bolivia and Utah made me the artist that I am today. And this place, Utah, has so much art happening in so many genders. So we have dance, we got film, and we have so many art happening. It's very vibrant. And what I like the most about this place is that the artists come together to create. It is not about how can our relationship benefit me, then I'll be in the, it is very communal. It is very united, and it's not a competition. It's like, let's do this together. And I love that about Utah. And I want to be part of that Brown Girls Mafia Club. Yeah.
Me too, but I'm the wrong color.
So that's what I wanted to add.
Did anyone else want to add to this conversation we're having about how the space of the West and the Intermountain West is contributing to your work as an artist? Because otherwise I'll happily move to the next question.
Actually, I also wanted to add that Utah's creating a lot of art, and the Utah Arts Division is always sending grants and grants and grants, big grants, smaller grants. They just want to help the artists grow, and also the universities that like creating a lot of work. So I feel like we have pretty good support here with the Film Commission as well. Yeah.
Okay, so moving to the next question, could you talk about a moment in your career that epitomizes the opportunities and or obstacles that you faced in West? Ramona.
Well, when I graduated from the University of New Mexico in 1997, I was like the first film graduate. So when I graduated, I was it. And there were no opportunities. There really weren't very many films being shot here. And right out when I tried to get jobs in different industries, especially with the union, they'd always put you in that circle where, well, you can't get in the union unless you get a union job, but you can't get a union job unless you're in the union. And it's just like, well, how am I ever going to work? And I think that's a big reason why I became an independent filmmaker, because I understood that it wasn't going to work unless I just had to go do it myself, because there weren't any industries here in 96 or 97. So that was a hardcore realization for me. And I refused to move to LA. I just can't stand it. There's too many people and it's just too much. And New York, same thing. I can take about a week in New York and I just can't handle it. I'm used to New Mexico. I like seeing the sky. So, that for me was really important. So, and then I didn't mind that I wasn't going to make millions of dollars and be making some Marvel movie. That wasn't my goal. So it was fine for me to be here in this local environment. But it's good because we were able to build a film industry here. So now when people are coming out of the university here now, we can say, hey, here's a bunch of ways that we can get you into the union. Here's how you can get a job on set. This is how you can become part of the film industry. And so for me, working in this process all of these years, I think has helped facilitate that and help bring all of the film independents in New Mexico have helped to bring this industry here and made sure that a lot of people from LA now are moving to New Mexico. And a lot of people from New York and all these places are moving here because they understand that we are really incentivizing our industry.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things a lot of people don't realize is there's a lot of push in these communities that are outside of LA and New York to really hire from within. You get incentives if you hire local people in your community. You get incentives for purchasing, any of the equipment you need or renting the equipment you need. So I think that's something that people don't realize as well, is that all these incentives are at work in these local communities so that you're including the people and the resources of those communities as you're doing your filmmaking work. Amy.
I hate that my mind went to the obstacle first on this question, but it did. And then I realized in thinking through this this anecdote that the opportunity came up at the end too. But I was at, let's see, probably a year or so ago, I was at a Luca workshop where these badass female producers were breaking down independent film financing, the waterfall, investor models, relationships, things like that. And at that time, I had had a feature doc on my plate for probably 3 years that was just pushing this massive boulder uphill. I could not figure out how to bring the support in to make this film happen. And it was, about a marginalized group of people dealing with, a real injustice, and, felt like a very important story to have in the world. So I thought I should go and figure out, like, sharpen my business sense around, the business side of filmmaking. So I show up, and there are these two, my friend's son, who I love to death, and his buddy were there filming, just so we could have the workshop on camera. And somehow in the conversation, I found out that they got hired by Patagonia to, and I was like, okay, here I am, a veteran filmmaker with this, like, really important thing to put out in the world, and I can't get the money I need to make it happen. And yet these, white 20-something boys who are adventurous just got, like, hooked up with, a real budget by a major outdoor industry company. And I tread into these conversations lightly because I don't want to play the blame game. And I want to recognize talent that other people are bringing in, and how, it can be hard to navigate a brand's priorities and politics. But it was just one of those moments where I was really scratching my head and wondering if something was off in the industry. So I think what I learned about that for myself, and I actually just sent a bunch of pitches to Patagonia. We'll see how that goes. But, I think what I learned about myself is I don't necessarily fit into a formula that exists in the film industry that can be very prominent here, which is brand sponsored content. And that's okay. And the opportunity is to find your own confidence and belief in yourself that the stories you want to tell are important and deserve a space, and find your own way of getting them there. And it's not the easy path, but, just hearing the other panelists in this group, I mean, oh my God, you guys are doing it. It's amazing. You've done it, and it's possible. And so I think if you feel like you're kind of the square peg in the round hole, then that's okay. There are other ways, and just, yeah, I'll stop there.
Holly, what would you like to add?
I would agree with Amy. It's being in Utah and being a female is difficult in and of itself, but being a Utah female filmmaker adds a whole nother level. And then put on top of that my another intersectionality of being queer, that puts a whole nother level of obstacle in my way in a very patriarchal and very religious place. That's just the best way that I can put it. So I've had to make the decision that I am unapologetically myself, and people are either going to be on board with that or they're not. And I'm okay with that, because there are films that I solely want to make. Church and State was an uphill battle. There were obstacles in my way for 5 years trying to make that film and get it out to the world. And people who told me that I was silly for focusing on the wrong person, on the wrong subject of the story. And it was a conscious choice to choose the character that I chose. And so I don't know, I just feel like Amy, you have to decide, and also Ramona, I'm glad I didn't stay in LA. If I would have stayed in LA, I never would have become a filmmaker. And I don't necessarily love playing in the wheels of the industry. And so I think for me, being in the big movies and things like that is really not of interest to me. I'm going to continue to make whatever films I want to make and find places to showcase them, whatever that might be. There are places that I have found, and places that are filmmaker friendly, that I think are starting to become more realistic. And because what used to be friendly was places like Netflix for documentarians. It's not so friendly there anymore, especially for the indie filmmaker. And that was where we all would go to pitch our films. It is not that way anymore. It's changing. So we are constantly having to pivot. And I think for me, that is perfect. I think I suffer from ADD that went undiagnosed very, very much for most of my life. And that's why filmmaking and what I do appeals to my inner self.
Thank you so much, Holly. I as I've been watching all of your work, I've definitely thought a lot about how does your work relate to the self. It's something I'm personally interested in, but also I can see the connections between your work and who you are as a human being, not just as a filmmaker or as a woman or as a person of color. So I'd be interested to talk about that more too. But Angela, you had something you wanted to add.
Yes, when you talk about pivotal moments, I have one moment in my career that has stuck to me forever. I was teaching in the schools. So I'm a filmmaker and a dance educator. Okay, so those two worlds. And for many years, I worked as a dance educator in the district. And we had these meetings that were statewide. And we had music, drama, visual arts, and dance. All these incredible people in their art. And I worked for them for so many years. And then the person in charge, she announced that I was leaving the job to go get my master's degree in film. And I was heartbroken because I felt like I was divorcing myself from my art education. And so they made a nice little speech about me. And then everybody stood up and clapped. And I cried, they cried. And I felt their love. I felt their support. I felt that there were so many people there supporting me in what I was doing. And I feel like in my journey, I have found so many allies that have supported me. And that's a pivotal moment in my profession.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was so moving and such a nice reminder for us to think about how we have to turn to our communities and our allies now in this moment of crisis, to think about how we can support ourselves and the rest of our communities, especially these marginalized communities in this time of crisis. Cohardo, did you have something you wanted to add as well?
Sure. Very briefly, mine is a story from obstacle to opportunity. And as I said earlier, I'm also an actor, and my roots are in the theater, mainly here in Colorado, and I've been doing it for several years. And for the longest time, I had this thing in my gut where I got tired of going to watch artistic endeavors because I felt like my experience wasn't reflected on stage. It's hard for me to continually take my kids to performances where they're not reflected on stage as well. And then even as an actor, I felt like, and I'm not calling this racism, but it is bias that white was the default in casting. And it frustrated, and things are changing, but I mean, more so here, I suspect that things would be a little bit different on the coast, LA and New York, because of all the diversity there. But here in Colorado, I just felt like, wow, I felt like I'm treading water and going uphill as far as getting casting or opportunities to take my kids to something that reflects their experience, and it's not in the month of February. However, that very experience is what pushed me into writing. I felt like I can't sit here and wait for someone to give me an opportunity and to say, okay, you are worthy of doing what you were born to do. And I just couldn't visualize going through that any longer. And so I eventually just started writing, initially playwriting, and got with coaches and found out that my talents and skills lend themselves more to screenwriting. But for going through the obstacles that I've experienced here in Colorado, I wouldn't be on this panel today as a filmmaker, because I would have been wholly satisfied with taking roles and acting. And so my goal as a filmmaker is to offer as many opportunities to people of color as I can. I understand the story is the story. I'm also more importantly focused on getting people behind the camera, people of color, as best that I can, because I know that the opportunities are few and far between, especially here in Colorado. It is a challenge that I welcome. I've never shied away from any challenge, but at the end of the day, it is one. And I feel like, okay, if I have an opportunity to give others opportunities, I mean, you should have saw me when I did my first short. Oh my God, one thing that I never anticipated was that when I had to hire people, because I was paying, I had raised money to actually pay people, because as an actor, I'd done so much stuff for free that I just couldn't bring myself to ask anyone to say, can you do this thing for free? So I just went out, we did a Kickstarter, and we raised like $80,000 for the development of this film. And so we went and I started paying people back that I did have to do things myself. Mainly, I borrowed from myself, paid myself back. But it's just like, I never thought that I would light up the way that I did when I started giving people opportunities here in Colorado. Very talented people who were like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is better than directing, to be able to offer a job to someone to do something that normally here in Colorado, it's just tough. I mean, Amy can testify to that. And so one of the reasons why I decided even to do the feature, and of course, money is the tail that wags the dog, but to do it here in Colorado is because I want to offer Colorado people opportunities. Yes, my story is based in New York, but I want to do it in Colorado. We're going to get inside, and we're going to make inside Colorado look like inside New York, and then whatever. We're going to be very creative in how we create the ambiance in New York City exterior wise. I'm not sure how all that comes together, but I just believe that it will. And so I'm very excited about offering those opportunities to Colorado folks.
Thank you so much, Cohardo, for reminding us of the positive and the opportunities that this is being offered to us right now. And I'm wondering, as our last question before we go into the Q&A from our audience, I'm wondering if I think Cohardo, you've spoken to this, a lot of you have already spoken to this, but I wonder if you all could tell us more about how your own identity, your intersectional identities, your idea of yourself, and how that relates to marginality and kind of disenfranchised communities. Could you talk a lot more about how that impacts your work, and even also just not your work, but also the practices that you hold as a filmmaker? A lot of you are speaking about how you're including those people in your cast, behind the camera, in front of the camera. So I wonder if any of you would be willing to talk a little bit more about that.
I tend to try to make most of my sets female based, obviously. And, you know, I mentor a lot of students, particularly I work with UVU with their Film to Femme program. And so I mentor. I've participated in that program for 5 years now. And a lot of the students that come out of that program, I give opportunities to work with me when I have opportunities where I can pay them. I actually my editor for the current film that I'm working on was a student at BYU who approached me at my church and state screening and asked me to help produce their film Same Sex Attracted, which was here locally at the Down These Hills Festival. And she has been somebody that I've contacted often to use as someone to work for me. And so, you know, it really speaks to students out there who are listening to, you know, take risks, you know, introduce yourself to people who you think may not want to listen to you. Sometimes it will sting. I've been stung so many times being here, you know, as a beginning filmmaker and as an adult filmmaker. I didn't come to this field straight out of college as a young pup. I was leaving a and pursuing a dream of making films, and approached a number of really well-known filmmakers here in Utah who did not give me the time of day. And you have to decide that those people aren't going to determine your destiny. And you have to keep asking, because eventually you are going to find the people out there that are willing to mentor you. I never would have gotten anywhere without the mentors that I have had who have willingly taught me things about this industry and about filmmaking. And so for me, it's really important to give back. And as far as how my identity intersects in my work, I mean, yeah, I'm queer. I don't necessarily want to be boxed into telling just queer stories. However, you know, my being a female and being queer, I think definitely speaks to the films that I do make. I'm always looking to feature stories about the underdog overcoming. And so that's just kind of how I do me.
I think we have some shout outs for the underdog stories here. Anyone else want to speak to that question of how your own identity comes into play? Angela and then Amy.
So I was at the African Festival in Salt Lake City, and the announcer said there was African food, African clothing, and they had a stage, African music playing. People would just get on the stage and dance, you know? And the person on the microphone said, we need to do this. We need to show who we are. We need to show the artists that we are, because we need to fight the stereotypes. And when people see us on the streets, they don't think we're delinquents. They think of the artists that they have seen. And I was working on that project. It was in my head at that time, Samskara. And I thought, I need to show the art of these people of color. I need to show that immigrants are more than babysitters. They're more than people that cut the grass, which is, I appreciate the work that they do, but then the stereotypes need to be broken down, and they need to see the artists that each person brings. And so that's why we focus on that piece there, because we need to break the stereotypes. And that has become now my quest, to give voice to the people that don't have one, to support each other. And so that's what we're working on now.
Thanks so much, Angela. I think all of you are doing that obviously in your work. And I think that's part of the conversation we wanted to have today, is how do you uplift those voices? So Amy, what did you want to add?
This is a tough one for me to articulate, but I feel like I have to chime in here. again, I was raised by white middle-class parents. I'm half white, so I blended in just enough to float through that system. I don't think, I think white people see me as white. I've benefited from it, and I had a huge awakening around that, as many people did in last summer. And I think the hardest part to realize that was living in this very white community in Boulder, Colorado, and working in a pretty white industry, which is the outdoor industry where a lot of my films get lumped into. I was part of that, holding up that system that, my friends, my community, I was hiring all white crew. I even resisted a little bit just being a female filmmaker for a while. I just wanted to be a filmmaker. So I would purposely not get involved in female groups in the industry until I realized the incredible support there. So, I think as a mixed race person, it can feel really, I'm not finding the words, I'm sorry. This is hard to talk about when I don't have COVID brain, but it can be a very ambiguous space. And I think, one other thing is I made a story about two Navajo sisters, and Ramona, when I learned about you and your work, I was like, oh God, was I the person who should have gone in there and told that story? Like I had a huge knowledge of the national parks, and it was, something I was drawn to, but I got really self-conscious about that. So I think where I'm going with this is it's really important to always check ourselves and keep asking, how can we do a better job to bring in different light. I mean, we're telling stories about life, right? And the human experience. And if we don't have people with multiple life experiences chiming in and opening our eyes to different aspects of that, the stories aren't going to offer much into the world. And we're just going to, I speak for myself. Like, I think I've learned that I find my personal heroes in quiet places, and I've always tried to those are the stories I'm drawn to, and I'm sorry, I'm really struggling right now. And I think maybe I should just stop. I'm really having a hard time finding my words. I think there are ways where we can just keep checking ourselves and making sure that our crews represent, at minimum, the stories of the people we're trying to tell too. I'm going to stop there.
Thanks so much, Amy. And I just wanted to remind people, before we get the answers from some of our other panelists here, put your questions in the Q&A for this wonderful group so they can hear your questions and not just ours. Ramona or Cohardo, did you have anything you wanted to add about this question of identity and intersectionality? Ramona?
Well, yes, I think, my identity has affected a lot about how I go about the work I do. And in the beginning, I was reaching out to like the few Native filmmakers that I knew, and none of them seemed interested in being a mentor to me or talking to me about the process or anything. And I remember reaching out to a couple of them, and I just felt like they just didn't even want to talk to me. And I remember telling myself, I am never going to be that person. Never. I couldn't even possibly imagine being that person. And so when I meet young filmmakers who are interested in going into maybe doing filmmaking as a career, or if they don't know what they're doing and they're kind of curious about what I do, I will definitely take them under my wing. And I've hired several young Navajo kids to come help me do filmmaking. And in the last documentary we did, we always try to hire young Native girls to come to be a part of the documentary process, because I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in making films about Navajos, about doing documentaries in Navajo country. And I always, as of late, as of like the last 5 years, I have been a huge advocate for making sure that that doesn't happen, that our stories aren't told by outsiders from our communities. And of course, when you have that argument, a lot of people aren't wanting to hear that argument from you. They call you racist. They tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. And I mean, I've had this conversation in funding circles when we're sitting there trying to review funding for documentaries from people who aren't from these communities, who are actively being considered for funding to come into our communities and tell stories for us. And that for me has been the biggest thing that has pushed me into making sure that we advocate for these young Navajo filmmakers, or young Native filmmakers, Indigenous filmmakers, and that when they ask for help, no matter what it is, even if they just want to talk to you on Facebook or have a chat with you on the phone, you do it because you are going to give them hope. Because I remember thinking when I was young, what am I going to do? I want to do this film, like nobody cares, like, you know, and that's how it felt. And I think the reason why it felt that way was because even when I reached out to my own people, they didn't seem interested in helping. So I just made it a point to never do that. And so right now I'm working with the New Mexico Governor's Council. We just implemented the Senator John Pinto Award here in New Mexico, which awards $5,000 to 20 different films, all from Native communities here in New Mexico, Navajo, Apache, or Pueblo. They have to be from this state. But that kind of stuff is important to me because I want to make sure, I mean, $5,000 in the longer stretch of things, now that we're further along down our careers, doesn't seem like a lot of money. But when I was starting out in, I think it was 2004, 2003, they had a governor's cup here when I was just out of school, and they offered the same kind of thing. It doesn't exist anymore. But because of that $5,000 and support from National Geographic, we were able to make our third documentary, and it really helped us cement some places in film festivals and stuff like that. So I remembered that $5,000 gift, and we just managed to implement it again. So because I don't want to do this, I don't know how much longer I can be a filmmaker, but I want to make sure that there's never somebody that comes to us and says, oh, well, we don't know any Navajo filmmakers, because that's a lie. Now we know that there's a lot, and there's still more in training, and we're making sure that there's even more coming into the industry right now as we speak. So, I mean, I think that's where it starts and stops. It's what you can do to make sure that the people behind you are going to have a wide open door. Even though your door was shut in your face, you got to make sure and wedge that door open for them. And that's what's mostly important.
Thank you so much, Ramona. I think the importance of mentorship is such a huge part of a lot of your conversations that you've been having, and the importance of opening the doors for other people, providing other people with those resources, even if it's just answering a call or giving advice. I think sometimes we forget it's not just the money that's important as part of the conversation, it's also the support and mentorship you can give. So Cohardo, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move to the audience's Q&A?
Sarah, what is that question again? I'm trying to figure out if I can answer.
I'm muted, sorry. The question was, if you're thinking about your own identity, how does your work reflect that identity? And also I was asking, and you spoke to this already in your previous response, how do your own practices as a filmmaker contribute to the inclusion of those other identities that may be part of your community?
Okay, so I've spoken on that part. I guess what resonates with me is beyond being an African-American male, I think a large part of my identity is this lack of knowing that I am enough, or this fear that I am not enough that travels with me everywhere I go since childhood. And I think that I'm exploring that with others who are willing to go on a journey with me of what that looks like to not just know that we are all enough, not just know intellectually that we're fundamentally all the same. big giant bags of water and salt and minerals. But at the end of the day, before I leave this planet, know that no matter what anyone says, I am enough. And so that translates into the work that I do. I mean, I only do things for me that are challenging and that put me outside of my comfort zone. And when I say only, I mean, like, when I'm talking about artistic things, like I take things on that you can do this. I've taken a play on at a major theater with 3 days notice and learned a script in 2 days. I'm like, I'm enough. Yes, I can do this. I can do this. I can be a filmmaker. Yes, I can do this. And I can do it my way. I can do it with my truth, because I've talked to 1,000 different people about how they say I should do my film. And I will admit, I've sought people, to validate me under the guise of script consultation, when all it really was is, please validate what I'm writing, say that I am enough, say that this is good, so that I can move forward. And my journey in doing this is helping me realize nothing outside of me is ever going to give that to me. And so doing this and offering other people up, I'm attracted to people who the people who did the score on my film. I saw them at a function and I walked up to them and I said, you don't know it, but you're going to score my film. And I don't care if you don't even know what that means. And they didn't. They'd never done it before. I said, but you can do it because I can feel it. I sense it in you. And we did it. I didn't know how to put music to film. I just said, this is what feels right. This is what this moment feels like, and try to communicate it to them as best I could. What does that mean to you? And you give it to me and we'll make it work. And so this filmmaking thing is the most challenging thing. And I've done a lot of things that I've ever done, because it's so many different parts. They require so many different expertises that I don't have, that I just have to find it in myself or find it out with someone else. And so that's the best way that I can answer that question.
Cohardo, thank you so much for ending on that inspiring note. So I wanted to now talk about some of the questions that our audience has. And for the panelists, I've put that first question back into the chat right now. I'll continue to put those questions into the chat, and then I'll also read those questions for our audiences today. So our first question is for the whole panel. I wonder if there's time, if panelists could speak more about what Amy said about square peg and round hole, what I interpret as the hypervisibility of young white males, and what Ramona brought up about self-promotion and how this approach may not align with our worldviews. Are there strategies for navigating these dominant systems without compromising who you are, which is what Holly spoke about so eloquently? Does anyone want to speak to that?
I think, and this might be where I was trying to go, where I just failed on my last answer, but for anyone who's mixed race, I think something that's been coming up for me a lot as a filmmaker is, what community do I belong to that I can go in and tell a story of fairly, right? Not as an outsider. And because I don't know a lot of half Indonesian born Americans, that's a pretty small group of people here. I've found myself in a lot of diverse places, some where I probably didn't belong, and others where I can own some space. And I think for me, just with this, especially the hypervisibility of young white males, I was raised in a white community. I'm half white. If I understand the mindset, I understand the privilege, I've lived it, I understand the blind spots. So the role that I have tried to create, or that the space I've tried to create, so I'm not trying to fit into some piece that I don't fit into, is taking stories back with a broader perspective, and again, holding up that mirror to a group of people who I can relate to, who can hear me, I can speak their language, but they might not see this thing about themselves that I've been able to observe a little more clearly in other communities. Does that make sense? So, and I think that's really important in the outdoor industry right now. Like, you know, one of the things that's come up that we're even exploring is the idea that like live fearlessly is such a white privileged mindset to have. And that's like the anthem of adventure. So anyway, I think, so for me and for my work specifically, it's recognizing, you know, those shapes that you feel the pressure to fit into as an emerging filmmaker, because that's the system or the industry that exists. And then, I don't know, just kind of finding your own way in, if that makes sense.
Does anyone else want to speak to that? Ramona.
Well, I think the way that I've kind of dealt with that kind of thing, and in the same way, Amy, I think there are a lot of people in that same kind of genre, like, you know, the guys who have got all the Patagonia money and want to make a movie about some Alaskan guy, and they come and they want funding and they want to tell this story in this village in Alaska. So, I mean, I've had those situations, and I always try to bring it back to like, well, what kind of story are you really trying to tell? Are you trying to tell the story about your experience in this Alaskan village? Because if that's the movie you want to make, that's the movie you're making. If you wanted to make a movie about that village, then you would hire somebody from that village to tell that story. That's not your story to tell. So it's, for me, that's just, I've come up against a lot of backlash about that, but I stand firm. We've had our stories told by other people for so long that now it's just an irritation to me. And so I actively engage people when I find out that they're making a film about our community, or they're thinking about making a film about our community. I will engage them early in the process and say, why are you making this film? Why can't you hire a Navajo producer or a Pueblo producer to make that film? Or if you're going to make that film in that community, then you should hire somebody from this community. And so that kind of advocacy, I think, has kind of also championed the second part of that question about self-promotion. I never feel like I need to self-promote when we go out and we're advocating our projects, or we're talking about our work. It's about the work. I feel like that's the way I get around that idea, that Navajo idea of like the rude self-promotion elements. Like, it's rude to talk about yourself. So I'm not talking about myself. In the case of the Mayors of Shiprock, we were talking about them. The subject is them, their story, Shiprock, or, you know, whoever the subject of the film is, or, you know, the backlash that's happening in that community. That's the story. That's where we self-promote. That's what when my husband and I go out and we're engaging about our films, that's what's important, and that's what we promote. It's not about us. It's about these stories that we're telling, and that's what makes it different. And in the same way that you advocate for that, you're also advocating to have stories in our communities told by people from our communities. So I think it plays hand in hand.
Wonderful. Does anyone else want to answer that, Holly?
Can I just say something to Ramona's? You know, I sat in a Film Fatales webinar this summer, and it was all people of color, and basically asking for, you know, white people to step away and understand your place in storytelling, is not to co-opt, you know, people of color stories. And, you know, it's definitely a hard pill to swallow as a filmmaker, because, you know, I'm interested in people. And so, but I also know that those are not my stories to tell. And, you know, I even the story that I'm currently working on, it is a story I am telling, but it is the story that these women wanted me to tell, not the story that necessarily was what I had initially gone in to do, or how I would have done it. So, you know, I think that when you go, especially working documentary film, you go into someone else's community, environment, life, and it's a partnership between you and them as a filmmaker, and you really have to tell their story. It's not about you and whatever your agenda is. You have to put that aside, because everything changes as the story unfolds anyway. And you know, I think that for me, that's why it was really easy for me to walk away from telling a story from an Indigenous person's perspective, is that it is not my story to tell, and we have to, in our privilege, support that, not question it.
Thank you, Holly. Angela, what would you like to add?
I just have something little I want to say. We need to embrace that we're the square peg. We need to embrace that we don't fit. And we should stop trying to fit in. We are who we are, and we do what we do, and we go along our pathway. And that's all.
Cohardo, did you have something as well?
Only that I wholly agree with what Angela just said. My experience has been, and because I didn't know any better, I'm just looking at it and reflecting now, looking for, and most of the people in the industry that I went to were white, like, tell me, is this the right way to do it? And it occurred to me, because I've been in this process now, trying to get my film done or working on it in some way, shape, or form for years. But it was about a year ago that I got tired and I just scrapped the whole thing. It was like, because everyone white told me, you can't tell a period piece for that amount of money. You need millions of dollars, and let me see your story, and where's the inciting incident, and this is how you do this, and da 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 da, and wow, that doesn't seem like there's enough drama. Something else needs to happen. I'm like, well, I'm dealing with a Black man in 1918 who is putting blackface on his already black face to mock his own race in order to have some type of standing in the theater in 1918. If that's not drama, then I'm in the wrong business, you know? And so finally, I totally agree with what Angela said, is quit looking for validation from the establishment, because that's what it is. It is a systemic, inequitable business. And I'm looking at the people, and I have nothing against white folks who benefit from that. Of course, they're going to tell me from their experience, and they don't know what my experience is. And maybe there is a different way of storytelling that doesn't fit with what's comfortable for you. And so, yes, I'm with it all the way.
Thanks so much. We only have about 5 minutes left, but I have another question that's for Ramona. This person asks, I produced this segment on elder fraud, taking advantage of the elderly in multiple communities for the University of Utah. One of them was in the Navajo language. We want to do a follow-up project. How do we best involve the Navajo community in this?
Well, right away, I'll tell you right now, you got to hire somebody from that community. And there are plenty of Navajo filmmakers out there if you need a referral. But the real key to getting, and that's an important issue, elder fraud, it's so horrible and it's rampant out there. Lots of payday loans, lots of super high interest rates on cars, just insane what they do to the Navajo elders. But if you have a Navajo producer or a Navajo director that's helping you with your project, and you let them go into the community and find an elder to talk to you, the answers that they're going to get, and even if you have a Navajo language speaker, and if your filmmaker doesn't speak Navajo, then you should have somebody with them that does speak it fluently. So when they go into an elder's house and they're talking to them about fraud, you send them in there early so that the elder feels at ease. They're more willing to tell you everything that happened to them. You'll get a much better story. They'll be more at ease because these people came into their house. They talked to them ahead of time. They made that extra production trip to kind of get these elders used to being in front of the camera and engaging with with the camera. And so that is my biggest thing. If you send a Navajo crew in and with you to go in and meet these people ahead of time before you do the interviews. And so when you go in, they'll be happy to see you. They'll be more willing to talk to you about whatever you want to hear. And they'll be telling you stuff that they probably wouldn't have told if you just came in there without any other Navajos along with you. So it'll make for a better film. It'll make for more in-depth information that you'll be getting. So that is definitely my advice to you.
That's so wonderful, Ramona. Thanks for that wonderful advice. I wonder, does anyone else, we have 1 minute left here. Does anyone have anything they feel like they have to add to the conversation? They don't want to end this Zoom call without one more comment before we end the Zoom call today.
It's been my pleasure to be on this panel with so many wonderfully talented, interesting, diverse folks. I am so glad that I was made aware of this opportunity and feel connected to you all today, definitely.
I would like to say to the people that are listening that keep doing what you're doing. Work hard at it, give it your heart, and things will come. Just work hard, use your passion, make work that is valuable, and you'll do great.
Unapologetically make your art.
And believe that you can change the system, the industry, the things that feel really locked in place. The more of us that push against it, the more it's gonna shape shift.
Don't give up. I think that's the big thing for me. And I have to tell myself that every day. But don't give up. And if you just keep going and realize that things are changing now. Things are changing and people are starting to get a different outlook on the way things are going. And so that should be incentive enough for you to push through, because people are looking for different stories. People are looking for authentic stories. So don't give up on what you're doing. Just keep going. And somewhere down the line, it could be a month from now, it could be 10 years from now, but somebody's going to hear what you're saying and they're going to give you a place to say it.
Well, I wanted to thank all of you for coming, for listening to this amazing panel of filmmakers and artists. I want to hope that you'll attend future events from Utah Presents, and thank you to Brooke and to Utah Presents for inviting us to have this conversation. I'm hoping we can have it again in these other online forums, and perhaps in the future we'll actually be able to meet people in person. I'm so excited I got to talk with all of you today, and thank you so much again for attending this fantastic event.
I'll echo that gratitude and just share with everyone that we have a number of other kinds of virtual events happening. Of course, future Artists Elevated sessions. We are presenting the work of Dancing Earth, which is a Intermountain West-based contemporary Indigenous dance company. We are presenting their new work, which has recently been translated from a live in-person experience into a virtual episodic experience. It's phenomenal. We've been releasing